Hello and welcome to Canvas, the Niger Delta Roundtable, where I discuss the future of our region blessed with hydrocarbon resources. Every week, we give time, we reflect on topics relevant to the development of the Niger Delta and the people. On this episode, we're doing the same. I'm here, and once again, we're focusing on how to take this region to a more promising future. This podcast is sponsored by the operator of the NNPC Renaissance Total Energies Ajib joint venture, Renaissance Africa Energy Company Limited, headquartered in Port Harcourt. Thank you for joining. I am Adedayo Ilushakin. The topic for this episode is our art still relevant? Now, today we're confronting a question that sits at the heart of culture, identity, and creative expression. Is our art still relevant? Across the Niger Delta, Nigeria, and the wider African landscape, art has always been more than decoration. It has been a mirror reflecting who we are, what we value, what we fear, and what we hope for. But as society evolves rapidly, pushed by technology, politics, climate pressures, shifting cultural norms, and economic realities, the role of art is being tested. Does art still speak to the moment? Does it still challenge us? Does it still hold power in shaping how we see ourselves and our world? Again, topic for this episode on Canvas is our art still relevant? My guest is Professor Frank Ugiomoh. Professor Frank Ugiomoh is a critical art historian, sculptor, and printmaker with a deep commitment to understanding art as a system of science. His scholarship explores how African aesthetics, thought systems, and epistemologies shape the meaning and interpretation of artistic forms. With a career rooted in both theory and studio practice, he engages the plasticity of form and the construction of ideas to illuminate Africa's ancient, modern, and contemporary art traditions. His work bridges local cultural insights with universal artistic discourse, making him a significant voice in African art theory and historiography. Professor Frank Ugiomoh, hello, sir. Welcome to Canvas,
Pleasure.
the Niger Delta Roundtable.
Pleasure. Yeah, thank you so much.
It's good to have you here, sir.
Yes, my pleasure. Thanks.
I had a brief conversation with you before the cameras started rolling, and I've been fascinated by your insights and your deep knowledge and experience as to art history, relevance, and its essence, basically. And I was telling Donald just before we started recording this, sometimes I know when a conversation is just going to go a certain way. It's going to be at a certain level, and I'll be entirely fascinated. And I told Donald, I said, this is one of those ones. I thank you again for coming by, and I'm looking forward to our conversation on this episode.
Thank you so much.
When a question, with some of your expertise and experience and in-depth knowledge, when you hear a question such as the one I'm asking, or such as the one the topic reflects, is our art still relevant? Because I perceive that question in and of itself can be construed as being intrusive, maybe even annoying, maybe even wrong. What comes to your mind when you hear a question of that nature? Is our art still relevant?
Thank you for having me. I think my response generally is one, coming from background of pedagogy, to illuminate on what art is and why art has relevance in human life all the times. You know, the work of art is relevant for humanity in general. with your introduction, you were looking at the idea of a decorative nature of art. Beyond the decorative nature of art that is purely decorative is a cultural tool and meaning and has function in society. There are some artworks without functionality, but they are there for visual perception and appreciation. When you put these together, those that are decorative, those that are decorative and useful, those that are decorative but not useful, we are looking at humanity tapping into himself to do that which nature has endowed him with. That is imitation in a given sense and grand sense. But beyond imitation is the fact that art evolved, from my own understanding, within a situation where humanity or the human being living in the world was challenged by what the world offered him. And then he looked for an alternative to understand the world that he couldn't understand. I want to pluck orange as an ancient man. My hands couldn't reach the tree to pluck the orange. I now cut a wood, an item of nature, configure it so that I can pluck an orange with it. That can be seen as the beginning of man's artistic engagements. And for that reason, I've always described the world we live in as as constituting the natural visual form and the man-made visual form, which we call art, and which actually stands for what we call culture. Because nature now stands in opposition to culture. Man creating something to substitute for an ability to cope with nature. That's where art stands. But over the years, even within those frameworks, man made drawings in the caves, in the rock shelters, and all of that, and carved wood, carved bones to be in a position to carve the object or draw the object on the rock surface and all of that. So when you look at those scenarios, the ability to make actually, to provide alternatives for what nature could not offer man, is where art stands at basically. I am cold, and suddenly I know that I can bring some leaves together, scrape the furs of animal to make wool, and cover myself. That is man engaging his skill in order to survive nature. So generally, art from that perspective is all-encompassing, but civilization has moved up beyond the necessities for which man created things to cater for himself and protect himself and cope with nature, now to an aspect of creativity where you make things and you just keep them for what the German philosopher Immanuel Kant called art for art's sake. And then you put aside art for life's sake. So art for life's sake, which are decorative, which are utilitarian and all of that help us cope, stay now as non-art, especially from the Renaissance period. Even before the Renaissance period, the Greeks and Africans drew things on the rock surfaces. And you're asking yourself, why has this man drawn this? He has drawn it because it provides him a kind of leverage in terms of an appreciation of representation of himself, ideas and objects around the world and around him.
By the way, Prof, are you cold?
No, I'm not.
Okay, great. You talked about the functionality of art.
Yeah.
What determines the functionality of art?
What determines the functionality of art is that A spoon is an artwork. A shirt is an artwork. But a painting hanging on the wall has function too. Because that painting, properly probed, tells the story of the person or the civilization or the milieu that created it. So beyond decoration on the wall, it is a sign and a signification of who I am or who we were. And that is why oftentimes I tell people, I'm veering away slightly, that we don't have illiterate cultures. Because literacy is not about letters alone. We have visual literacy and we have literal literacy. Pictures tell stories more than words can even configure them.
Is all art then functional?
All art is functional. And that was why somewhere I gave a lecture at the British Museum in 2005. I said, art is for life's sake as it is for its own sake. So if I make this cup to drink water, I don't have any reason to embellish it by decorating it. But that decoration brings a kind of allurement for me to quickly say, oh, this thing is beautiful. I want to use it because it's a cup. Because a decoration on a cup like this cannot aid my drinking water. Because the shape of the cup itself is enough for drinking water.
Doesn't this suppose then that there is art that is not functional?
There is art that is not functional.
So, all art is not functional?
Some, in terms of utilitarian value. In terms of utilitarian value, some arts are not functional. That's why the Western man calls them applied art. But some arts, you cannot use them for anything. They just stand and they are sufficient unto themselves.
Let's go back to the topic.
Yeah.
Is our art still relevant? The phrase, our art, would that be an appropriate expression to use? Is there such a thing as our art? Or is art simply just art?
There is a thing as our art, because identity matters for humanity. So we oftentimes, when we say our own, there is a level of appropriation, assertiveness, and ownershipness arising from an object. This is our art, because it speaks to us in a way that some other things may not speak to us. Let's assume now, I want to use an extreme example. Pablo Picasso became very prominent for borrowing or appropriating aspects of African masks from Gabon because he found it quite interesting, to finish the work he titled The Ladies of Avignon. If you see that painting, you could say directly that this is African art, and then this is our art. But I argue on the contrary to say the man in Europe was fed up or was getting bored with a photographic realism that their art amounted to. And so when Pablo Picasso fell into them and created an artwork that looked like not their own, but our own person has created this work, it supplied for an urge to have something different from what they have always had. So many Africans who see that work and say, oh, don't mind Picasso, this is African art. This is our art. But the European man too says, this is our art, because when Picasso created that work, it supplied for an urge to move away from photographic realism. I don't know if you understand what I mean.
Totally, okay.
Yes. So there is always an identity question around art. And that is, we created this. Ideally, artworks do not come innocent. they come from a background of ideology that defines the need of a people. But it is never oftentimes on the surface when you look at it. It's only when a critic and historian probes into the nature of what was put in that art that you begin to say, oh, this thing that looks innocent on the face, this is the purpose it served, or it serves in society.
You say that our art, I think art generally, but to put it in some more context, our art is reflective of society, societal needs,
Yes.
or society in general. So, if we agree that there is such a thing as our art, I think we can agree that it has reflected our society.
Yes.
It did. Because also it looked a certain way. Some would even say, art historians like yourself would say it's identifiable.
Yes.
When you see certain art, you can trace where it comes from. However, art also evolves. So that takes us to my question now. It is the year 2026.
Yeah.
Does our art still exist? And does it still reflect our society or our needs now?
It does. All art, according to Frank Willett, art is not a felicitous accident. If art is not just a happenstance, art always comes to the artist's intuition because he lives in a society and feels something about the society he lives in. So he moves from feeling to depositing felt impulses around what he feels about his society. And so when you study an artwork created today and look at it deeply, you see indications and indices of society in that work of art. Every age operates on what we call a latent ideology not seen by all, but we find ourselves sitting on that ideology to perform and operate. There is what in art we call synchronic analysis. If you identify what is in vogue now in a particular artwork, to confirm that that idea that is in vogue, which you recognize, can be validated. Test it with literature, test it with music, test it with dance, test it with architecture, test it with fashion. You will discover that item that canonized 2026 in this isolated matter. You can see that it runs through all of this, but an ordinary person may not know. But it's more obvious in fashion, But when you look at the visual arts, painting, sculpture, and all of that, you can find some of those necessities and address latent in there, but covered or papered over by the look of what you're seeing. An exhibition is going to open on Saturday in Port Harcourt here. Something Spills of the Creek by Beam Cookie. I'm the curator of that exhibition. He's an adept person at pencil drawing.
Pardon me, Prof. For anybody who might be watching this later, that's Saturday, what date?
Saturday, 27.
27th.
No, Saturday, 28, yes.
Is it 28? So could someone help us please confirm that? What date? Saturday is what date? 28. Okay, yeah. All right.
Do we have a leap year this year?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
Let's check that. Yeah.
So
you're saying that Ibim is pencil, something like that?
No, yes, a graphite pencil artist, So he does images with pencil and all of that. Portraits that are lifelike, pictographic and all of that. And he brings this against a stained background with coffee, diluted coffee. So you have a wash of coffee on the background. You have this lifelike mimetic image transposed within, and you have splashes of dominantly red and blue colors, and, in the majority of works. And he calls it spills of the creek. He's still discussing what we call environmental consciousness, eco-criticism from my own perspective and all of that. But you can walk into that exhibition and you say, oh, these beautiful figures and all of that. But within the beautiful figures, he's addressing a contemporary concern, what we oftentimes reduce to climate change and all of that. And beyond climate change, he's reenacting the story of the creeks in the Niger Delta that began with merchandising in oil with the British and the Dutch in those days. So the British-Dutch that heralded oil merchandising, equally polluting our waters with palm kernel oil spill and all of that, now moving to crude oil sales and domination that equally is, how would I call it, environmental irresponsibilities and degradation being perfected by oil companies, So when you look at Ibim's work, his address is a cover of what I'll call more than 100 years of history of the Niger Delta Creek, So, and a body of artwork like that covers history, runs on memory, and takes us from memory in oil palm dealing in the Niger Delta to now dominant crude oil dealing and all of that. And then its implications, So though that's an exhibition of that nature definitely brings about or establishes what the question you're asking, the relevance of such works, But the relevance of an artwork standing on its own requires people who are knowledgeable a little bit in terms of discussing or lending words and meaning to the work of art. It's very important.
If you'd liken our art today to be, and you used the expression in vogue, I mean, what's in vogue today is not what was in vogue yesterday.
That's true.
Don't that imply then, and you liken it to music and you liken it to fashion. Has our art then changed?
Nothing in human culture and consciousness remains static. An author I read so many years ago, and is still my favorite art critic historian, Sternberg, stated clearly, and when I read those lines in his paper, it occurred to me to mean a whole lot. He said that every age that succeeds another age tries to derogate that age, not for any other thing, because if a new age does not bring a change, it lived for nothing. I don't know if you understand what I mean. If a new age does not bring a change that it can be identified with, it lived for nothing. And so change is constant. Our art will always change as we have new ages coming on to replace the old one.
As you described earlier, Grecian art, the rest of it, you talked about drawings in caves and all of that. A lot of that art, if not entirely so, was designed to document people's stories.
Yes.
And even our art, so to speak, in times past, did a lot of that as well. However, as you've admitted, there's been change over time, reflecting more recent realities. Are artists Or our artists now still in the business of documenting our stories as once was done in the past?
Every artist, like I said, lives in an age, lives in a milieu, lives in a civilization. He may not set out directly to say, I want to document my age, but he lives in an age and feels certain impulses about his age. As a poet, as a musician, as a visual artist, they go to, deposit those impulses and feelings in sculptures, in paintings, and all of that. So those activities are conscious depositions of an age, one, but I want to quote somebody, Beat Wies is a German critic. He said, every art jumped off the conveyor of history to stand in time as an abiding image. That the artist never intended his work to be seen by humanity for what it is as a documentation of history. What he actually did was responding to the impulses of his time, to just say, well, I feel this. I want to create this, and he creates it. For me, as an artist, in my final year in the University of Benin, I left the studio. As I got to my room, I tuned on my radio. Nigeria's President Obasanjo was announcing that Nigeria was broke and that they were going to implement some austerity measures. I was angry listening to Obasanjo. And I told myself, who the hell is this man telling us that a rich nation like this is broke? I left my room immediately for the studio and created an artwork I titled Agony of the Beloved. I considered Nigeria a beloved country, gifted, human, material, resources, and all of that. So why should somebody tell me after mismanaging my money that my country is broke? I created that artwork. So it's an impulse arising from what I heard about my own country.
By and large, we are in the digital age.
Yeah.
That's a much used expression these days, and has been for some time.
Yeah.
And that digital age is even more prominent these days, especially with the advent and proliferation of artificial intelligence. Has the digital age strengthened or weakened the relevance of art?
It has strengthened it if we know how to approach, domesticate it, and use it for our own advantage. As a writer, or even as an artist, somebody once called me to say, give me a stained glass design. And I've always done stained glass design. I called up an iconic image of a particular religious title, fed it into ChatGTP, and said, I'm working on a window of this dimension. I want to hazard colors of a cool nature that will complement this image in a stained glass environment. And it gave me, and I liked what it gave to me, because it stopped me from what I'll call color wash experimentation around that image to determine what can suit the image. And so from that perspective, my commitment to time in my work was saved, became economical, became manageable in terms of time for me and all of that. So artificial intelligence, properly used, and if you know what you're seeking for, can help a whole lot. I'm a writer too. I've read so many books and I remember the books. And I'm writing something and I remember, I'm not able to go the whole hog searching this book for this thought and idea from this artist in this book. And I call on AI, provide the title, provide the book, provide probably the chapter in the book and say, this man discussed this within this framework. Can you recall it for me? It saves me time of perusing through pages to search for something.
How about authenticity? Does this affect authenticity in any way?
It doesn't affect authenticity because you gave directives. You didn't go there blank and empty. You went with a notion, an idea of what you want. I don't know if you understand what I mean. You went with what you had a desire. And that desire you expressed. And an expressed desire was fetched for you from a book you recognize and know. So there is no way it affects authenticity. It only helps you to save time.
This conversion Niger Delta Roundtable, is our art still relevant? Is what we're discussing in this episode of the podcast. I'm joined by an erudite scholar in the world of art, Professor Frank Ugiomoh. We have to go for a break. We'll return shortly. The conversation will continue. Please stay with us.
In the heart of our journey, where the sun touches the earth and the wind whispers through the trees, a new chapter unfolds. A chapter where energy illuminates more than just bulbs. It lights up minds. A chapter of unity, a coming together with a common goal to energize futures and illuminating lives. In classrooms, young dreams evolve, inspired by the promise of a brighter tomorrow fueled by available energy. Small businesses flourish, becoming seeds of prosperity. Energy that empowers and is catalyst for growth and change. The future is energy. So, let's light up the path to a sustainable future together. Energy for you, me, and the world at large. Energy for people and planet. We are Renaissance.
Welcome back to the Conversion Niger Delta Roundtable. I'm Dio, and this is brought to you by Renaissance Africa Energy Company Limited. We're discussing, is our art still relevant? Professor Frank Ugiomoh is my guest. Prof, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Once again, thanks for stopping by. I perceive that there was a time when appreciation for art was, if I may use a very simplistic expression, was a very big deal. You needed to maybe belong to a certain class, even, or at least have a certain level of intelligence to appreciate art and relate it with in a certain way. Considering that, generally speaking, trends are so extremely transient now. I mean, literally what was trending yesterday morning could have changed today. And it's such a worldwide phenomenon, unlike ever witnessed before, because of what the internet has done, of course. What's happening in the US right now was formed a trend there, can immediately form a trend there in a matter of hours. Our audience is still appreciating art and relating with it the way that a non-professional like yours would prefer, or do people simply just take a look at it and then just move on, just visually, absorbing and then moving on? Or is there still a deep appreciation for art as we have experienced in some time past?
If I may approach that question, I'll approach it from the point of view of what I call the economic exigencies of the time. A lot of people are hungry, so they don't even have time to wait for what becomes what my teacher used to call luxury. Some people think that art is luxury. But when it comes to appreciation of art, it's a gift of the human person to fall in love with art objects. Before the digital age, when we would say phenomena used to change quite, meaning phenomena was a little bit stable. I recall a situation as an undergraduate in the University of Benin. My project, a relief wall sculpture for the students' bar, I titled it Movement and Convergence. And I asked myself, what can symbolize movement and convergence? I thought the pebbles on the seabed, they're always moving and rearranging themselves into beautiful constellation of forms. I created that on a relief. And then I asked myself, what else can be a factor of association with the river? I thought of fronds, water fronts and all of that, fronds from the river. When this work was exhibited, a woman from a traditional Benin setting, because our department then, it was only this expanded metal that was used to fence us from the outsiders, not the way we build block walls these days. The woman was looking at my work with a whole lot of rapt attention, and you could see some flicker of joy moving around the face. And the woman said, this work would have been beautiful in an Olokun shrine. And people looked and listened and laughed. It occurred to me that Olokun is the goddess, is the water goddess among the Benin people, the owner of Okun, the owner of water. And my motives was sourced from water. And you're asking yourself, a woman who didn't go to school, she wasn't in my head when I was creating this work. And I've created the work and exhibiting the work. And she comes around to say, this work would have been fine for the Olokun shrine. How would you place such a person in terms of appreciation? This is a farmer, didn't go to school. I brought the example because people are endowed. People come from backgrounds we do not know. And so the question of literacy and illiteracy around that appreciation, we should be a little bit cautious about it. Because they lived in societies that made art. Art is not an alien to the human person like I started. Every human being engages art, involves in art. And when you see through art that appeals to you, literal literacy can be cancelled out completely. Visual literacy, cultural background, and my antecedents as a human being come into play. And so, art appreciation has continued up till today. If you go to Lagos, where art exhibitions hold on a weekly basis, more than 5 galleries are opening exhibitions every day. People move in troves from one exhibition to another. And collectors are buying artworks. So, unlike a place like Port Harcourt, where you have about probably 2 or 3 galleries, and exhibitions happen once in 2 or 3 months and all of that, the value or the momentum around art may not be high, but the momentum around art still remains high because I have been to exhibitions in Port Harcourt where people come, the crowd is there, but not as much as the Lagos crowd. And they live within the art ecosystem in a museum and in a gallery, and they enjoy it and they go home feeling satisfied.
What is that one thing, maybe one thing, that you wish more people understood more deeply about the role of art, especially now?
What I have often advocated is that the work of art, even when it has dimensions that allow people to buy into it by way of appreciation, needs the human person to lend voice to it. A Greek scholar of the classical period said, and I quote, "The work of art requires an intelligent spectator who will go beyond the pleasures of the eye to discuss those things that inspired pleasure in him about the work of art." By implication, if I see an artwork and I like it, I should open up and talk about it, share my feeling with another. And so in that process of sharing, we are enriching appreciation in that work. This is why I like this work. Oh, this is why you like this work. And we agree, and in some places we disagree. So one thing I actually would appreciate is that, is there a way we can hype and increase visual literacy by way of discussing arts generally and then getting people to know to talk about art? Because the much words you invest in an artwork, the richer that artwork becomes. And the richer people will begin to show interest in the work of art. People oftentimes are shy. They see an artwork, it is fine. But what is beautiful about artwork, they keep within themselves because they think that if they talk about it, if they open up, they may be considered as goofing or not knowing what actually to say about an artwork. But the work of art is done without a spectator investing words, even at times presence in the work of art.
In the course of our conversation,
Yes.
It's been established that our art has changed.
Yes.
If it has changed, that means it will continue to undergo change.
Yes.
So might it be safe to say then that our art now doesn't look like it looked maybe 50 years or a century ago? It's changed. And if that change is going to be a continuing factor, in what direction do you see contemporary African, Nigerian, or even Niger Delta art going in the foreseeable future?
When we say art change, art really doesn't change because the imageries we bring into art recycle. And that's why somebody talks about the anachronism of the image. I'm asking myself, what is the relevance of painting mother and child today? And in another 15 years, 20 years, 200 years, artists will continue to paint mother and child. What is the value of painting like this or like that? like that or like this. This thing was a metaphor in an artwork 220 years ago. And today, it's relevant again in an artwork that this man is creating. And that's where context becomes relevant. And context simply addresses the need of that age that allowed somebody to bring an image that was used 2,000 years ago, 200 years ago, and recycle it in a particular age or in a particular contemporaneity and all of that. And so what I am saying is that meaning attached to images in an artwork occur within the framework of existing experience of the age that sees that artwork. And so nothing is archaic, nothing is too new. It's the context in which we place metaphors or imageries used in the artwork that change and give new value to things that had been created in the past that are refurbished and represented in this time. So context allows for change. And even within that change, there is what we call polychronicity, in the sense that in any one artwork, ideas from past ages can find themselves in that artwork because time has passed. Man had continued to create artworks. And I'm creating an artwork today, and I'm bringing ideas of various ages that were past into that artwork. And my audience within a particular age still recognize and find value in that metaphor that I created.
Whilst context and themes may be recycled, may not change much.
No,
for example,
themes may be recycled, but context appertains to a particular time, and all of that.
So rephrase that, thank you. So while themes may be recycled, as you mentioned, mother and child,
yes,
is our style, or is style still identifiable? Once again, with reference to our art, what it looked like, say, a century ago, and what it probably will look like now. If someone did a mother and child painting a century ago, and it was identifiable then as coming from maybe some locale within the Niger Delta, will it still be identifiable now, and maybe even a century from now, if the same theme, mother and child, were employed?
It will be identifiable, be as something that appertains to or belongs to a particular age and rendered in a particular context. Because context, as a product of what I call the ideology of an age, every age is governed by an ideology that is different from a previous age. And so, when the mother and child created 20 years ago is given birth to in my age by another artist, the context of understanding, context of use or appropriation for my age becomes different and gives a different cloak to what the artist of this age has done. But my major comment regarding style is that style may not be universal because style, as properly defined, belongs to an individual. Style is that dominant signature that belongs to me, belongs to you in the things you do. No two persons can do one thing the same way. That's where style comes in. And the origin of the word style is from stylus, of ancient writers, a carved feather dipped in the ink, and you use it to write. So, and it indicates an individual identity more than a collective identity. Although when the Renaissance artists were beginning to write art history, they could talk about regional style. But even when you look at the regional style, individual marks will still be found in what is called a regional style, because style has to do with me, my identity, and my person.
Prof, we must wrap it up shortly. I fear we are exceeding our time.
Okay.
However, maybe my final question, are we ever in danger of art becoming irrelevant? And stemming from that, what most artists and audiences alike do to ensure that art remains relevant?
The irrelevance of art is out of the question. Art must remain relevant because art has a way of stabilizing the human psychology, affective. It gives the human person assurance in so many ways. It is an alternative to what man can lay hands on beyond what nature gives you. And that's why Chinua Achebe described art as a second hold on nature. Art can never be relevant. It's a second hold on nature.
And that's a wrap for this episode of Canvas, the Niger Delta Roundtable. I've had a very interesting time on this episode. Really, it's been quite fascinating for me. Discussing is our art still relevant? My guest has been art historian, Professor Frank Ugiomoh. Prof, it's been a pleasure having this conversation with you.
My pleasure too. Thank you for having me.
I'm looking forward to some of the projects you mentioned earlier on. We're discussing before we started recording. Looking forward to you churning out all of that wealth of experience and knowledge you've gathered over time for us now and for future generations.
Yeah, thank you.
And that's a wrap on this edition of Canvas, the Niger Delta Roundtable, brought to you by Renaissance. Thanks for joining us. Our art is relevant now and will continually be relevant, world without end, or even when there is an end eventually, depends on your belief. Thank you once again for watching, and bye for now.